to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. We're on the eve of everybody's favorite day of the week, that being Payday Friday. And Brian Kelly paid a lot of money for LSU to make it to the playoffs this year. He nearly went broke bringing in the number one rated transfer portal class from this offseason. And this is a sign that Brian Kelly knows that there's enormous pressure on him entering his fourth season as LSU's head coach, because the prime reason why he dipped from Notre Dame to coach LSU is because he felt like this program gave him the resources to compete for a national championship that Notre Dame wasn't able to give him. And his first three seasons have been relatively disappointing when you think about the amount of talent that LSU normally has on a year-to-year basis. He had a Heisman Trophy winner in Jaden Daniels, 2 first-round wide receivers, and Brian Thomas Jr., Malik Neighbors, and the furthest he's been able to get LSU is to the SEC championship, which was in his first season. This year, though, he feels like this team has their best chance to not just make it to the playoffs, possibly compete for the SEC championship, but also win a national championship if everything goes right. And normally when teams go this heavy into the portal, they feel they're just a few pieces away from what they had coming back from last year's team to actually being able to reach that ceiling. We saw Ole Miss do this and have this similar approach last year, and they came up short. LSU, though, I feel that with the talent they have on this team, they should be a lock to get into the CFP this year. This is the most talented team that LSU has had since they last won a national championship in 2019. And it's playoffs or get fired for Brian Kelly this year. If LSU can't make it to the playoffs with this stacked of a team, Brian Kelly has to go. There's just no more excuses that you can make for him. And the floor for LSU should be 9 wins. But the ceiling is possibly they run through the regular season and they go 12-0, because this team doesn't really have any huge question marks outside of the offensive line. You're stacked everywhere on offense. You got a really good quarterback coming back in Garrett Nussmeier. And if he follows down the same path that we've seen the last 2 LSU quarterbacks have in their second seasons when they won the Heisman Trophy with Joe Burrow and Jaden Daniels, he should be able to be just as good as what those guys were with what he's going to be throwing to at wide receiver. You got Trudez Green, who's a 6'7" monster at tight end, kind of like a Kyle Pitts hybrid. Barry Brown, Nick Anderson are new additions from the portal. Barry Brown was incredibly underrated and underutilized when he was at Kentucky. And then they also have a really good defense as well. You knew about how good Whit Weeks was last year. Harold Perkins comes back fully healthy. And then you get 2 really good defensive ends out of the portal, one from Florida. You got Patrick Payton from Florida State. And then you got some really good pickups out of the portal to address the secondary as well. There is no more room for Brian Kelly to have any more breath to make any excuses for why LSU can't compete at the highest level this year. He didn't just go all in this year because LSU has to make it to the playoffs, but he also was desperate. And LSU dropping this much money on this year's team is a sign that Brian Kelly is in desperation mode. He knows that he's on the clock this year, because if LSU doesn't finally break through under him, he's going to be on the chopping block. Yes, he does have a pretty big contract, but obviously money isn't an issue for LSU. If they were more than willing to spend this much on this year's team, they'll be more than willing to pay the huge buyout to get rid of Brian Kelly. So for LSU to go this heavy into the portal, it's not just a sign that they believe this is their best shot, but Brian Kelly knowing that it's playoffs or get the pink slip if he's unable to deliver a college football playoff berth. I feel like he will be able to do so. You can say that he is overrated, which I will somewhat agree, but he's been coaching for longer than the majority of us have been alive, and everywhere he's been when he's had a team of this quality and talent, he normally ends up being able to maximize it. So my prediction for LSU is that they go 10-2. They probably make it to the second round of the playoffs. I feel that Brian Kelly, all the money that he put into this year's team is not going to be in vain. This team is going to be in the playoffs. And if not, then not only am I going to be wrong, but Brian Kelly's going to find himself out of a job come the end of December. Miami fans are really mad at me right now. I am a Hurricanes fan. I live, breathe, eat, and sleep Miami football. But with me having this platform and covering all of college football, I have to separate my fandom and not allow my love for Miami to cloud my perspective on how I talk about other teams, especially rivals like Florida. And I've been called out a lot this offseason for overhyping Florida despite being a Miami fan, because I'm low on Miami this year. I don't think that Miami's going to make it to the playoffs. I don't feel like they're going to win the ACC because for the last 22 years, this program has been unable to have double-digit winning seasons. So if I'm low on Miami because of my lack in faith in Mario Cristobal, how can I possibly be higher on Florida than what I am Miami when Billy Napier is not too far different from what Mario Cristobal is? And allow me to explain my logic for this. Mario Cristobal last season went from 7-6 to 10-3. Billy Napier went from 5-7 to 8-5. This year, Florida could possibly win 9, maybe 10 games with them having a generational quarterback in DJ Lagway, but also giving him a really good defense with the amount of production that Florida returns on that side of the football, which was something that Miami was unable to give Cam Ward last season, who was the greatest quarterback ever to put on a Miami Hurricanes uniform. So Florida is a more balanced team this season than what Miami was last year. And Florida, quite frankly, has been a lot better at developing talent than what the Miami Hurricanes have. Florida doesn't have to drop a huge bag on the transfer portal to address a lot of issues because Billy Napier has done a really good job of developing the talent that he's recruited, despite Miami bringing in more talented recruiting classes. And with DJ Lagway at quarterback being pretty much hyped up as the Messiah for Florida, essentially, he's going to be able to elevate this Florida team to a level and a place that they haven't reached since they had Tim Tebow down there in the swamp playing in Gainesville. I just feel a lot better about Florida this year because we know that the best has yet to come from the Gators under Billy Napier. And they had a remarkable in-season turnaround. Outside of when they got stomped by Texas A&M Miami, they played really better football since that point. And they had back-to-back ranked wins against LSU and Ole Miss, who were vying for a playoff spot at that time. Miami didn't beat a single ranked team last year. And the thing with Florida is that they don't lose to the teams that they are expected to beat like Mario Cristobal does. So in some capacity, I'm a lot higher on Billy Napier right now than I am Mario Cristobal because Mario Cristobal shouldn't have lost to Syracuse and Georgia Tech. I don't want to hear the excuses about the defense didn't have this, the defense didn't have that. With how elite of a recruiter Mario Cristobal was or is, those never really should have been major issues. Miami has enough money to where depth shouldn't have been a problem last year. Miami now has to go in the portal to overcompensate for their inability to develop guys that they recruit. And people wonder why Teddy Bridgewater doesn't want a lot of his high school players staying at home playing for Miami because you got a better chance being developed elsewhere if you leave the city of Miami. And Florida has been better at developing talent than what Miami has. All of Florida's best players this year, the majority of them, were guys that Billy Napier has developed from recruiting. Miami, on the other hand, they haven't really had a lot of guys that they developed from recruiting. They got to go in the transfer portal and get a bunch of guys, and they're hoping that they pan out. And also, Florida has a huge quarterback advantage over Miami this year, where last time when they played Miami, they were at the disadvantage at quarterback because they had Graham Mertz, who was getting absolutely outplayed by Cam Ward. Now, with the roles being reversed, Florida having that generational quarterback in DJ Lagway, Miami having Carson Beck, who is really good. I believe that Carson Beck is going to bounce back this year, but even if Carson Beck plays his best football, he won't be better than DJ Lagway. So I'm more higher on Florida because they've been better at developing talent, not having to overly rely on the transfer portal. And they also, with how tough their schedule is, they've been better at winning games, punching up above their weight class than what Miami has, along with not losing the teams that they're not supposed to, unlike Miami, who ends up punching down and playing down to competition that they should be able to beat. So you can get mad at me for favoring Florida a lot more than I do Miami, but it's not as if I have Florida having a better record than you. I both have these teams finishing with 9-3 records. I think the disconnect is that Miami fans truly believe that this is the year. But we've heard this for over the last 5 years. It's always Miami's year. So I'd rather be surprised than disappointed when it comes to Miami this year. Billy Napier went from 5 wins to 8 wins last season, including beating 2 teams that were ranked in the CFP top 25. Where did Miami's ranked wins come last season? You can't name any because they had none. Florida, in some capacity, has had a little bit more momentum in terms of their development and the hype that they have with DJ Lagway than what Miami does, because you feel as if Miami already reached their ceiling last year, and Florida, the best is to come with how well they played last year. And recency bias is also a thing. Miami ended the season on a little bit of a sour note with how they were right in the thick of making it to the playoffs, competing for the ACC championship. Then they suffer 2 devastating losses in upset fashion to Georgia Tech and Syracuse. Then you lose to Iowa State in the bowl game. Meanwhile, Florida was absolutely scorching hot going into the offseason. So that momentum that Florida got at the end of 2024 is definitely going to carry over into this year. And that's another reason why Florida, in my opinion, has a little bit more to be hyped up about than what Miami does. So I feel like the hype for Florida is definitely justified more than what Miami fans want to believe. And I feel Miami fans are just a little bit jealous that more people are higher on Florida than what they are about the Canes, just because we've grown accustomed to seeing what Miami does coming off a peak season. They'll have a great season when they win 9-10 games and they come crashing right back down to earth in disappointing fashion the season after. You can get mad at me all you want to. You can call me a op, but I'm not about trying to prove my fandom to anybody. I'm a fan of this sport before anything, and if you read the bio, it says JT Sports is all about giving raw, uncut, and unbiased takes on the NFL and college football. And I got to be unbiased about this. I'm rooting for my Canes to win. I'm rooting for my Canes to win it all. But being unbiased, I just don't have a lot of faith that Miami is going to be as good as what Florida is. And if you put Miami in the SEC, they could do a lot worse than what Florida could do this year with how tough Florida's schedule is. When you tell somebody that Alabama is going to make it back to the college football playoffs this year because of how good their quarterback play is going to be, people tend to laugh at you because they scoff at the idea of Ty Simpson being good enough to help elevate this Alabama offense. But nobody really should be laughing at Ty Simpson, because what he's about to do this season at Alabama is going to be reminiscent shades to what we saw Mac Jones do 5 years ago when he led Alabama to an undefeated season in a national championship. Because the same way people scoff at Ty Simpson was the same way people scoffed at Mac Jones. Remember, when Mac Jones was expected to become the starter, nobody really wanted him to start because Bryce Young was the more flashier player. Although he was a true freshman and he was unproven with how dominant he was at modern day, everybody rather see him because he was a more exciting player to watch than Mac Jones, who was a prototypical drop back passer, didn't really have a lot of mobility. And you see how that turned out. Mac Jones ended up having the most prolific season for an Alabama starting quarterback ever. And we can see that same scenario play out with Ty Simpson because Ty Simpson has a lot of similarities in his game to Mac Jones. He's slightly more athletic than what Mac Jones is, but his game is predicated off being able to shred your defense from within the pocket. And he definitely should be able to do that with Alabama having a top 10 offensive line coming into this season. He also has arguably the best wide receiver trio in all of college football, throwing to Jeremy Bernard, Isaiah Horton, who they got from Miami out of the transfer portal, and Ryan Williams, who's the second best wideout in college football. And let's not forget that Kalen DeBoer's tag team partner comes down to Tuscaloosa this year, and Ryan Grubb. And we remember the amount of damage that these two brothers did when they last were together 2 years ago at Washington. So everything that Ty Simpson has around him should ensure that he has nothing but a successful season in his first full-time campaign as Alabama's starting quarterback. And I don't believe that Ty Simpson even has to be as good as what Mac Jones was in 2020. All he has to do is be better than what Jalen Milroe was last year, which shouldn't really be that hard. Jalen Milroe was a large reason for why Alabama's first season under Kalen DeBoer was the disappointment that it was. Rather, if you want to admit it or not, if you want to say he doesn't deserve all of the blame, okay, cool, but he does deserve a large chunk of it. And yeah, there were some other factors that kind of failed Jalen Milroe, but his inability to hit the forward pass at times, overthrowing guys who were running wide open 5-yard slants, was a huge hindrance to this offense. Ty Simpson is going to be a fresh air for Alabama fans because you finally are going to see a quarterback that's going to throw the ball with more accuracy consistently and isn't just going to be a one-trick pony trying to spam deep balls to Ryan Williams all game. No, you have a quarterback in Ty Simpson that actually is going to be able to carve you up from the pocket. And the last time Kalen DeBoer had a really good quarterback operating out in the pocket, it was Michael Penix, and he was a finalist for the Heisman Trophy. Ty Simpson, his floor is a lot higher than what you may believe. Folks want to see Keelan Russell start because he can do more. He's more mobile. He's going to be more fun to watch. But flash doesn't win national championships, people. Think about the last 3 national champions. Think about who their quarterbacks were. Ohio State just won a national championship with Will Howard, who was a 6th-round pick. The year before that, Michigan won the national championship with the handoff merchant, J.J. McCarthy. And the year before that, 3 years ago, Georgia went back-to-back with the mailman, the myth, the legend, Mr. Sir Stetson Bennett, who was a walk-on. You don't need flashy quarterback to win in college football. Flash hasn't won national championships the last 3 years. Which one would you rather have? Would you rather have the flashy guy that's inconsistent like what Jalen Milroe was? Because he was flashy. And look where that got Alabama. Nowhere. Ty Simpson, on the other hand, he isn't flashy. But he'll be good enough to get the job done because I'd rather have a Toyota Camry that's consistent, that doesn't break down on me, that's good on gas, versus having a pre-owned Lamborghini Urus that has all of these maintenance problems. You got to get the battery changed every 2-3 months. You got to constantly get oil changes. It's always a problem with the car. That's what Jalen Milroe was. He was a used Lamborghini Purus or Urus, however you call it. Yeah, when he was at his best, you understood why he was a Heisman frontrunner at times. But when he was at his worst, he really kept Alabama's offense stuck in the mud. You don't need flash to win in college football anymore. Some of the best teams that have won national championships have done it with just having consistent, reliable quarterback play. And that's what Ty Simpson is going to give Alabama. At least you know that you're not going to see a guy going 9 of 22 in the biggest game of the year like what Jalen Milroe did last year. I believe in Ty Simpson. Not all solely because I believe he's a capable quarterback, but he just has a better situation this year than what Jalen Milroe had last year. You don't always need the most super athletic guy to have a good quarterback. And when you think about the history of the Alabama teams that won under Nick Saban, he didn't have the most flashiest quarterback in the world. He won his first Natty at Alabama with Greg McElroy. Then he won back-to-back with A.J. McCarron. And then he won another one with Blake Barnett, Mac Jones. Some of Nick Saban's most least talented quarterbacks were the ones that won him national titles. So if Nick Saban can win with quarterbacks that weren't as talented as Bryce Young and Tua, Alabama can compete for a national championship year 2 under Kalen DeBoer with Ty Simpson as long as he is consistent. Some of you guys confuse flash with what actually works, and that is consistency. Keelan Russell is going to have his time next year after Ty Simpson balls out. But for right now, Ty Simpson is the guy who gives Alabama the best chance to win. And just laughing at Ty Simpson because he's unproven and he's not that flashy, I feel it's a joke that's not going to age well. Did you guys know how Dabo Swinney got Clemson back into the national championship conversation again? He went back to what won him his first 2 national championships, which is having a terrifying defense that nobody in college football wants to go up against. When you remember the defenses that Clemson had when they won their first 2 national championships, they had incredible defensive line play. They had guys like Cleveland Farrell, Dexter Lawrence, Christian Wilkins, who were first-round picks in the NFL draft. This year, Clemson's defensive line is exactly similar to the ones that have dominated and helped won Clemson national championships in the past. You got TJ Parker and Peter Woods, who right now are in the top 10 of ESPN's 2026 NFL mock draft. Last season, you saw TJ Parker have 20 tackles for loss and 11 sacks. This is the best defensive lineman in America. And Peter Woods isn't too far off. He had 17 pressures as an interior defensive lineman and 9 tackles for loss. Do you not know how difficult it is to pull that off as a defensive tackle? And he also had 3.5 sacks. And what's even more terrifying is that both TJ Parker and Peter Woods are only going to get better. Dabo Swinney also finally adapted and went into the transfer portal and beefed up an already dominant defensive line by adding Will Helt, who was one of the few bright spots of a terrible Purdue team last season. So the rich just get richer when it comes to the defensive line. And then the linebacker play. Remember when Clemson had Isaiah Simmons, the guy who could play 4 different positions? He played corner, linebacker, safety, edge. Well, they don't have anybody on this team that has that kind of versatility, but Sammy Brown isn't too far off. He's really good getting after the quarterback. He's really good in coverage. He's also very good against the run, and that's the reason why he was a true freshman All-American last year, and he was second on the team in sacks, and he was third and tackles. The guy can do pretty much about everything. Hell, I think if they wanted to put Sammy Brown at corner or safety, he might be able to pull it off because from what we saw to him last year, there's nothing that he can't get done. And then they also got Wade Woodis, who comes back, who also was really productive for Clemson. But that's not even the tipping point for why Clemson's defense is so terrifying. Pro Football Focus said that Clemson has the fourth best secondary in the nation entering this season. They returned tons of production. They got AJ Terrell's little brother, and Avion Terrell, who is a projected first-round pick, just like how the stud defensive linemen for Clemson are. He led all Power 4 corners and forced incompletions last year of 14. Then you also have Ashton Hampton, who was a freshman All-American last year. So Clemson has several All-American players on this defense, and they also have several players who stepped up big time as true freshmen. That's why Dabo Swinney has such a big smirk on his face after Clemson lost to Texas, because he knew that last year was just the start of something greater that he's been cooking up for the last couple of years, because he knew with how good that team was to have so many young guys on defense play the way that they did, Clemson was destined to be back in the playoffs again, like what they will be this year. But the secondary, the linebackers, the defensive line isn't the only thing that's going to make Clemson's defense terrifying this year, because Dabo Swinney got the biggest offseason addition in college football this year, which was him shocking the world, firing his defensive coordinator, then replacing him by stealing Tom Allen from Penn State. Nobody saw this move coming. Nobody expected for Tom Allen to jump ship from Penn State, who was just in the Final Four, to come to Clemson. And you want to know why Dabo Swinney stole Tom Allen from Penn State? Because he has a similar philosophy to Brent Venables, who was a major part in why Clemson won those 2 national championships not too long ago under Dabo. Because he has a fast and aggressive defense that he likes to run, similar to Brent Venables. Now, their schemes are a little bit different. Their methodology may be a little bit different, but there's a lot of overlap that Tom Allen has with how he runs his defense, along with Brent Venables. And Dabo Swinney wants his defense to really get after it. And with the amount of talent that Clemson has, this should be one of the 5 best defenses in America this year. Because last season, in Tom Allen's first season as Penn State's defensive coordinator, they were top 6 in points per game allowed, and they also were 5th in total defense. So with the amount of talent that he's going to have to work with, a Clemson squad that has 3 projected first-round picks and a ton of incredible talents as underclassmen, this is a defense that nobody wants to play this year. This is one of those defenses that you can just look at on paper and tell that this is going to be an elite unit. And this is part of the reason why I have Clemson making it to the national championship and going toe-to-toe with Texas. This is now a Clemson team that has the coaching, and they now have the personnel again to compete with anybody in America. That's why they're a 3-point favorite ahead of their week 1 matchup against LSU. And what's even more terrifying to me is that a lot of these guys who are going to be balling out this year are going to be right back to running back for another season because they're so young. Clemson's defense should not be as terrifying as what it is going into this year. And I have the Tigers making it to the national championship this year. Don't know about you, but one thing about Dabo Swinney is once you push this brother to the brink and you force him to have to change his philosophy, oh, trust me, he's going to make you pay. And allowing Dabo Swinney to finally utilize the transfer portal, allowing him to get Tom Allen is not going to vote well for the rest of college football this year, because Dabo Swinney is ready to raise hell. He hears all of the naysayers saying that he fell off, Clemson will never get back to the level that they used to be. He can't wait for this season, and I see why he was smirking so much after that loss to Texas, because he has something up his sleeve. He knew that last year was just the start of something small that was about to turn into something even bigger this season. Tennessee had an incredible season last year. They won 10 games. They beat Alabama, which was their biggest win of the year. Then they made it to the college football playoffs. And if you're a Vols fan, you feel like last season was a small step towards something greater, which I believe that Tennessee will eventually win a national championship under Josh Heupel. He's recruited well. He utilizes the transfer portal pretty effectively. However, this season, though, I don't feel like Tennessee is going to be able to run from this rebuilding year that they have approaching, because they have a lot of question marks going into this season. How good is the quarterback play going to be? I don't think that losing Nico Iamaleava is a huge loss, because he wasn't really that good last year, and you were just banking on the potential, and you were hoping that with his second season starting in Josh Heupel's offense, he would build off what he did last year. So Joey Aguilar, in some capacity, he could be an upgrade from Nico. The question is, how fast is he going to be able to adapt to Tennessee's offense? Because Tennessee runs an offense that you just can't pick up and learn right away. It takes a little bit of adjusting to how this offense is ran and how it's set up. But I do think that he could be possibly better than what Tennessee got in Nico last year, because Nico was really all over the place at times. Joey Aguilar, he's a guy who has started several years at Appalachian State, and he's been one of the best G5 quarterbacks in college football. But who is he going to be throwing to at wide receiver? Who's going to step up in this wide receiver room for the Vols this year? Because they lost 3 of their top receivers from 2024. Deontay Thornton to the NFL. Bro McCoy is done. Squirrel White transfers to Florida State. Now you're banking on Chris Brazil, who was a transfer that you got from Brazil a year ago. And then you got Mike Matthews, who was a blue-chip prospect coming out of high school. So if those guys step up, then Joey Aguilar should be in pretty good shape. But even if you do have good receiver play this year, what's going to make or break this team is going to be this offensive line that has to replace 4 starters. And even the guys that they had starting last year, they weren't really good at times. Sometimes the pass protection tended to be a little bit faulty in certain moments. So the offense has a lot of production that they have to replace. Especially, we didn't even get into the biggest loss, which is them having to replace Dylan Sampson. The man had arguably the greatest season for a Tennessee running back ever. And he was the SEC Offensive Player of the Year. So it's going to be some huge shoes to fill for Deshaun Bishop and Peyton Lewis, who definitely both should have breakout seasons because they're really talented backs. But Dylan Sampson was pretty much the best running back in the SEC, and I felt like he should have been more discussed in the Heisman conversation than what he was, because he definitely was one of the best players in America, and he was the large reason why Tennessee was able to make it to the playoffs with how inconsistent Nico Iamaleava was at times last year. But the offense just has to replace so much production that I feel they're going to have some growing pains at certain positions, especially on the offensive line. Receiver, you normally do a pretty good job of reloading at that position, but the offensive line is one of those positions where it's kind of hard to just simply reload, because part of having a good offensive line is also about having chemistry. And normally, some of the top offensive lines in the nation are the ones that have a bunch of guys that have a lot of snaps that they play with each other, because you got to have good communication on the offensive line. You got to be able to pick up blitzes. You got to be able to make certain adjustments pre-snap to certain looks that the defense is throwing at you. So I feel the offensive line is probably going to be the biggest nitpick that I have for Tennessee's offense and their defense. Their secondary is incredibly thin. Their best corner, Jamal McCoy, who is a projected first-round pick in the 2026 draft, he suffered a ACL injury in January. Now, the good thing is he suffered that in January, and it normally takes about 6 to 8 months to recover from that. So he is going to be able to return at some point during this season, but the question is when. And you already were thin at corner even before you had the injury to Jamal McCoy. Now you added Colton Hood from Colorado, who was pretty good. He should be able to come in and be pretty productive for you. But what about safety? Because one of your projected starting safeties ended up transferring to Miami. So there's a lot that Tennessee has to reload on defense and offense. They are pretty good on the defensive line. That's not really a concern because they rotated a lot of guys in and out of the lineup throughout last year to make sure that they can keep everybody fresh. They still do have strong linebacker play, and Josh Heupel, with his offensive genius, he should be able to elevate some of the new guys that's going to have to step up at wide receiver along with Joey Aguilar. But I feel there's a lot that Tennessee has to overcome for them to get back to the college football playoffs. And I feel like their ceiling is 9 wins, but their floor, they could go 6-6 if everything goes completely left for them, because you're going up against an Alabama team on the road that returns a lot of production and a lot of experience. You're going up against a reloaded Oklahoma team that's not fully healthy. Florida returns a really experienced roster along with a promising quarterback in DJ Lagway also, and you play that game in the swamp. So Tennessee has a very difficult schedule, and with what they have to rebuild at certain positions I just feel it's going to be too much for them to be able to be a playoff team again. I'm not saying that Tennessee is going to be dreadful, but I can't see them taking a step back or two this season, with this more than likely being a year where they have to start over from scratch and develop guys. And next year in 2026, we probably see Tennessee right back in contention to make it to the college football playoffs. How can Florida State pull off the impossible? How can they bounce back from the season from hell in 2024 and win the ACC championship again? Well, if it's going to happen, the Gus Malzahn hiring at offensive coordinator has to work out. And if it does, he's going to be able to elevate the play of Tommy Castellanos, who was pretty good at Boston College. He had 18 touchdowns. He didn't really have a lot of turnovers, and I never really quite understood the decision by Bill O'Brien to bench him when he was playing some pretty good football. I do know at times he tended to be a little bit streaky, but for the most part, he was pretty solid, and he was one of the better quarterbacks in the ACC when he was at BC, and he has a lot of similarities to Kyler Murray. I call him Family Dollar Kyler Murray because he isn't the kind of athlete that he is. He doesn't have the arm strength that Kyler has, but he's a few notches off. He is a really good scrambler. And with Gus Malzahn running the kind of scheme that he does with a lot of design quarterback runs and read options, RPOs, it's going to be able to best utilize the strengths of Tommy Castellanos' game. And let's not forget that every running back that you plug into this Gus Malzahn offense seems to get a plus 20 overall boost to their initial overall. Because for the last 3 years that Gus Malzahn was at UCF, he produced top 10 rushing attacks. And when he was at Auburn, the ground game was always really good. And when Gus Malzahn has had a similar personnel to what he has to work with at Florida State with Wardell Williams, who should have a breakout season, really good power back with really good explosiveness as well, and Tommy Castellanos with what he can do with his legs, it reminds me a lot of when Gus Malzahn went to the national championship when he had Trey Mason and Nick Marshall in the backfield. And if the ground game is really good for Florida State, then they're going to be able to help their defense out by not having them on the field for that many plays as what they had last year. They're going to be better at controlling the clock. and being able to impose their will up front. And if Florida State is going to be able to have a dominant rushing attack, they're going to need these portal additions on the offensive line to hit the offensive line. Not only could they open up holes in the ground game, but they couldn't even pass protect really efficiently neither. This year, though, Gus Malzahn brings in a bunch of offensive linemen from the portal that have multiple years of experience. So you're not really banking on a bunch of unproven guys who are living off potential. You're banking on guys that have proven to be serviceable starters at their previous spots. And if their new offensive line coach, Herb Hand, ends up being able to get the most out of this group and he can get them to gel early, that's going to open up everything for this offense, because everything starts on the line of scrimmage. No matter how good you are at receiver, the game is won and lost on the line of scrimmage. And if this offensive line can improve under Herb Hand, then the ground game is going to be really good. The passing attack is going to be really good, because Florida State got two really good receivers out of the transfer portal. You got Deuce Robinson and Squirrel White, and although these guys don't have a ton of production, at least they're more proven than the guys you had catching passes for you last year. Squirrel White is really fast. He's going to be a really good deep threat in this offense. And Deuce Robinson, I don't know if you guys remember the guy who had that one-handed catch against LSU and USC season opener last season, but he was the guy who made that catch and it went viral. It was posted everywhere. So he is going to be similar to what Johnny Wilson was. He's like 6'5", 6'6", has really good length, and he has the ability to come down with those contested catches, and he can make all kinds of acrobatic plays as well. So you're really good at receiver. You're really good at running back, and you should get quality quarterback out of Tommy Castellanos. So the offensive line is really going to be the unit that makes or breaks Gus Malzahn and the rest of this Florida State offense. But if this offensive line with the portal additions that they made end up panning out, then they should be not just incredibly improved on the offensive side of the ball, but they should have one of the better offenses in the ACC with how good that ground game should be. Now, defensively, Florida State is going to be really good on this side of football. They should have one of the best defenses in the ACC this year due to the hiring of defensive coordinator Tony White, who has produced top 25 defenses everywhere that he's called plays at. Florida State on the defensive line, I still think that they're lacking in that area, but they got a really good young secondary. They had a bunch of young guys who stepped up when their names were called, such as KJ Kirkland, who was really productive in his 9 starts as a redshirt freshman. You also have Shaheem Brown, who led the team in tackles. They are going to be bringing in 3 new starting cornerbacks. Charles Lester III is a breakout candidate that I have circled because he was the second best player from Florida State's 2024 recruiting class. He was the 84th ranked player out of high school that year by 247. Really good athlete, has pretty good size as well. So if he ends up being able to be properly developed in this Tony White scheme, then I feel him, along with the rest of the new cornerbacks they're going to be throwing out there, should be really good. I still don't know how Florida State's going to look from the linebacker and pass rush standpoint, but I don't think that they'll be too bad in that area due to the impact of this Tony White hiring. So if all of these things work for Florida State, they can find themselves in the ACC championship, because Mike Norvell won this conference before, mainly assembling this team through the portal. So if you can do it once, you can do it again. The downside with the portal is that you can't use it to completely overcompensate for your inability to develop the guys that you recruit. And Mike Norvell, I feel at the midway point of last season, he understood that, and that's why you started to see some of the younger guys on this team get more action. And I feel they're going to be a lot better with the guys that they end up getting out of high school when it comes to developing them, because you can't recruit well if the guys that you're recruiting, you're just throwing checks out at them, but they don't have faith that you can develop them for the next level. So Mike Norvell, I really feel this offseason, he's put a lot of emphasis on making sure that the guys they recruited have gotten the necessary development. And these are the guys that they primarily are going to be leaning on this side of the ball this year. And with Tony White taking over as the defensive coordinator with this 3-3-5, I think that is better suited for the ACC than what it is for the Big Ten, just with there being different styles of play between both conferences. So if all of this goes right for Florida State and you get really good quarterback play out of Tommy Castellanos, you're able to have an elite rushing attack with Gus Malzahn, that's the OC, the offensive line and wide receiver additions hit, and the Tony White hire is as good as what it should be, you can be right back in the ACC championship again. You probably could end up making it as a 2-loss team because, look, although Miami has a talent advantage over you, with Mario Cristobal losing games to teams he's not supposed to lose to, you could beat Miami this year. And also, you just can't predict the outcome of a rivalry due to talent because rivalry games are different from any other game that you play because it just has a different feel and a different aura to it. And I do feel that there are a few games that Florida State has in their schedule that they should be able to win that they were unable to win last year. I mean, if you would have told me that Florida State was going to lose to some of the teams that they did last year, I would have never believed it. But this year, I feel that if all of these factors play out in Mike Norvell's favor, they can find themselves right back in the ACC. It's not like this is the Big Ten or the SEC. This conference is wide open. You will be facing Clemson, and maybe you get a little bit lucky against Clemson. You catch them on the off game, and you end up taking advantage of that, and you can end up winning this thing. But other than Clemson, there really is no other team in this conference that you can look at and say, yeah, they're locked to win it because nobody really recruits at a high level, and it's kind of all over the place when it comes to the ACC. So there definitely is a path to Florida State winning the ACC again if all of these things that I mentioned go right for them.